Hero shooters are like snowflakes in the winter. One day you wake up and look outside and suddenly there are a shit ton of them. And the common saying is that every snowflake is completely unique. But really, they can't all be that unique. Many different franchises have dabbled in the hero shooter genre, but an anime property I think that could work perfectly for one would be My Hero Academia. I mean look, hero's in the title. It's a match made in heaven. And I'm not just talking about those overpriced My Hero Academia skins in Overwatch 2. Today, I want to run through my ideas for what a My Hero Academia hero shooter could look like, including characters, seasonal updates, maps, game modes, and more. So, let's get started. Of course, we're going to start with the most important and most interesting part of any hero shooter, the heroes themselves. Each character will be one of 3 classes: DPS, tank, or support. Our hypothetical launch roster would be 33 characters, the same amount as Marvel Rivals, and there will be 11 characters per class to keep things even and fair for all players, unlike some other games. For each character, I'll run through my ideas for their class, playstyle, and maybe a couple of specific moves. If I made an entire moveset for every character, then we'd just be here forever. And if you guys got any ideas for moves, classes, characters, then let me know down below. Our first character is going to be the most obvious pick, that being Bakugo. Couldn't have a My Hero Academia game without him. He's going to be a DPS, with his primary fire being simply an explosion, but I'm thinking it'll function similar to a shotgun, with high damage but mid-range. One of his moves could function similarly to Doctor Strange and Marvel Rivals. By dealing damage, he can build up his sweat meter, which can then be fired off in one giant blast. And of course, his ultimate would be his Howitzer Impact. Our next character will be Deku, who's also DPS and will be an all-around type character. His primary fire will be his air blasts, while his abilities would reflect his multitude of quirks, such as black whips for traversing and binding. I think a cool ultimate could involve Gear Shift, where he enters overdrive mode using Gear Shift and Fajin. It'll enhance his speed and strength. Then when the ultimate ends, either after a certain amount of time, or when you manually choose to end it, he'll unleash a powerful attack. And rounding out our main trio is Todoroki, who is also a first tank. He'd be good at AoE and long-range fighting. He can create defenses with his ice, such as ice walls to block attacks, but he can also deny space with AoE attacks from his fire. His ultimate sees him activating Phosphor in order to launch a Great Glacier, which freezes and damages all enemies in front of him. Our next character is another tank, All Might. I think it would be cool if he functioned like Diva or Hulk, and his base form was weak All Might, but he can transform into buff All Might. While in his weak form, he can simply shoot from a gun or something, I don't really know. But when in his buff form, his primary attacks would simply be punches. He would have a move where he can instantly dash to a teammate in range, almost proclaiming "I am here." Another move could be a buff for his allies. All Might can say "Go Beyond plus Ultra" and increase the damage and defense for all of his teammates within range temporarily. And his ultimate would of course be the United States of Smash. Now for the main villains, with Shigaraki first being a DPS. He would excel at AoE attacks, his primary fire sending off trails of decay, with his abilities being large areas of decay, damaging and slowing enemies. A cool ultimate could be a large AoE attack that branches off in a circle surrounding Shigaraki as hands grow off of him, slowly applying decay, an effect that deals damage over time to all enemies caught by the fingers. The other main villain, all for one, would be a tank. His primary fire would be those tendril thingies he always uses, shooting a tendril out for each time you fire. He can use his impact recoil to deflect attacks, and his air cannon to knock back enemies. For his ultimate, he can shoot out one powerful tendril that, if it hits an enemy, can then chain together and extend through the first hit enemy to each subsequent enemy as long as they're within close proximity. Every enemy hit will take damage and be effective with all for one, and won't be able to use their abilities for a set amount of time. Now that we've gotten the main heroes and villains out of the way, we'll start running through characters by category, starting with students. First up we have Uraraka, who will be our first support character. She'll be able to use her zero gravity quirk to support our teammates with buffs like increased speed. Now I know this has nothing to do with how our abilities work in the show, but we need to arbitrarily give every support a healing ability. I'm thinking something like Mercy. Uraraka will shoot out her grappling hook, attaching to a teammate and healing them over time. Next is Ida, who would be a DPS. He's more of a flanker and will be able to use his engine quirk to travel across the map quickly and jump his enemies. Kirishima's up next and would be a tank, which I think his abilities would be pretty self-explanatory, able to use his hardening quirk to bolster his defenses and tank enemy attacks. Asui is her next support, and she's more of a mobile support, able to use her frog-like abilities to quickly traverse the map and support allies. Tokoyami is another tank, able to summon and control Dark Shadow, using him to block attacks as well as execute wide sweeping attacks. Next is Jiro, who is another support using her sound waves to slow enemies. Kaminari is up next and is another DPS. He can use his pointers to set up electric traps and fields across the map. Next is Yaoyorozu, a support, who can create different items to support and heal her teammates. Ashido is up next and is a DPS, able to use her acid to quickly travel around the map and attack enemies with its poisonous attributes. The final student from Class A is Moneta, who would be a support, able to use his balls as traps against enemies, movement for himself, and healing for allies. Our next round of characters will be the big 3 starting with Mirko as a DPS. He would be another flanker, excelling at movement and stealth, where he can quickly travel through walls to catch enemies off guard, then use his physical abilities to deal lots of damage. Next is Nejire, who would be a support. She would use her energy to not only attack enemies, but to also heal her teammates. And finally, to round out the big three, we have Tamaki, who would be a tank, and I purposely tried to make each of the big three a different class, so we get some cool team-ups with them. Tamaki would be able to create different limbs, such as shells or tentacles, to block enemy attacks and bind enemies. Now we move on to pro heroes, starting with Aizawa, who is a support. He would obviously be able to use his quirk to disable enemy abilities, but he could also use his wraps to bind enemies and heal allies. Next is Endeavor, who would be a tank, able to create giant walls of fire to block attacks, as well as large AoE attacks to create space. Mount Lady is next and is our first female tank. She's able to switch between her normal form and her enlarged form at will. She's quicker and lighter while in base, but slower and stronger while enlarged. Cementos is next and will be a tank able to summon walls of cement to block off paths. Our final pro hero is Hawks, who would be a DPS. He can hit enemies from long range with his feathers, but also quickly fly in and out of danger. Now we move on to the League of Villains, starting with Dabi as a DPS. He's a glass cannon with very powerful long-range fire attacks, but with weak defense. Next is Toga, another DPS. She'd be more of a trickster type of character, moving around the map stealthily and using her ultimate to transform into other players. Next is Twice, who is a support. He can create clones of his allies to overwhelm the enemies, or create clones of himself and assign them to teammates to heal them over time. Spinner is next and is a tank, functioning similarly to Mount Lady, with a quicker, weaker base form and a slower, beefier transformed form. Mr. Compress is next and is another support, using his marbles to stun enemies and summon traps. Finally, to round out the League of Villains, we have Kirogiri, another support, who excels at teleporting allies across the map to get them back into action.
One hit!
Who the
Oh shit.
How'd he teleport me onto point, dude? What the fuck? And for our final three base roster characters, we have three more villains from various arcs. First is Muscular, who's obviously a tank, who can reinforce his defenses by growing his muscles. Pretty self-explanatory. Next is Overhaul as a support, using his quirk to heal and fix his allies. And our final base roster character will be Stain as a DPS, able to throw his knives and stun enemies that he damages. But you know we can't just cut off the roster at 33, which is why I've outlined 6 additional seasons of characters, with 2 characters per season. The first season is Class B, including Monoma and Kendo. Monoma would be a support able to copy the abilities of both allies and enemies. Kendo would be a tank able to use her big fist quirk to block attacks and protect teammates. The second season is Villains, with Lady Noggin and Redestro. Lady Noggin would be a DPS and our first pure sniper character, whereas Redestro would be a tank, growing stronger the longer you're in combat. The third season is Pro Heroes with Kamoy Woods and Fat Gum. Kamoy Woods would be a DPS, using his wood quirk to bind and attack enemies. Fat Gum would obviously be a tank, able to support damage and enemy attacks, to then counterattack. The fourth season is Students with Hatsume and Inasa. Hatsume would be a support using her support items to grant boosts and heal her teammates, whereas Inasa would be a DPS with wind-based AoE attacks. The fifth season is Mentors with Gran Torino and Best Jeanist. Gran Torino would be a speed-based DPS, while Best Jeanist would be a tank using clothing fibers to reinforce allies with additional armor. And finally, season 6 is Antagonists turned Heroes, aka I've run out of ideas but wanted to include these two anyways, with Shinso and Gentle Criminal. Shinso would be a support similar to Aizawa, with Gentle Criminal as a DPS, using his elasticity to give him and his teammates bounce points, but also set traps to keep enemies away. And that would be our roster. I tried to include the most important characters to the story as well as some fan favorites. There were some more I could have included, but I figured they were too derivative of characters already in game, and weren't relevant enough to warrant being included. Now we move on to maps and game modes. The standard game modes would be, the standard game modes payload and point capture. I think the easiest location to include would be the USJ. I can see it working for both payload and point capture. Point capture at 3 different locations all across the USJ, and a payload that runs throughout the whole facility. The next payload map will be Ground Beta, where the payload itself will be the bomb from the heroes and villains training. Our next payload map is Ground Gamma, where the final exams in the Class A versus Class B joint training to exercise took place. Our fourth and final payload map will be the Shiai Hasakai, or however you pronounce that compound, and the payload would be the Quirk Destroying Drug. The next map will be UA High itself as a point capture map. The next point capture map is the Provisional License Exam Arena, and the final point capture map is Musatafu City. And to switch things up, there'd also be an additional special game mode taking place in the Sports Festival Arena. There'll be a tourney of 1v1 matches taking place in the middle of the arena, just like in the anime. And those are my ideas for what a My Hero Academia hero shooter might look like. I think the property would lend itself pretty well to this genre, and considering they were willing to take risks with a game like My Hero Ultra Rumble, I can honestly see something like this happening. If you disagree with any of my picks, or if you have your own ideas, I'd love to hear them, so let me know in the comments down below. And now, if you'll excuse me, I gotta get back to raging at Marvel Rivals.